Funeral customs of the ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egyptians practiced mummification. There were three different types of mummification, depending on wealth and how much you had to spend on somebody's service. The first type of mummification was the most expensive. There was an iron hook, and that pulled out any brain matter it could read. It was cleansed out with special fluids. That's all I could find on that. After this was done, the abdomen was cut open with either a sharp rock or a sharp knife. I read that it was both. All the internal organs were removed, and the inside of the abdomen was cleansed and then stuffed with different kinds of herbs to prevent smell and decay. Once this was done, the abdomen was sewn up and the internal organs were placed in canocopic jars. Sorry, I skipped ahead. The body was then covered in natron and wrapped in linen strips and was set for 70 days. After the 70 days were up, the body was returned back to the decedent's family, and then it was, coffin. The second most expensive type of mummification was a little cheaper just because there was less care given to the body. For instance, there wasn't any incision made into the abdomen. What happened was oil of cedar was actually inserted into the anus of the decedent, and then it was plugged to prevent leakage. In the third option, it was the cheapest option. There was even less care given. The only thing that was cleansed was the intestines. The canocopic jars. There were some jars. They were usually made of different kinds of materials, but they always had a painted wooden head on top. Each head represented a different son of Horus, and they were deemed guardians of the organs. The jackal represented Dumatef and held the stomach of the decedent. The baboon actually held the lungs. The human head held the liver. And then the falcon held the intestines. All Egyptians were given some kind of burial. Being rich, being poor, being famous did not matter at all. They believed that if the dead were not properly cared for and buried, then they would come back as ghosts and they would haunt the living. So back in Egyptian times, ghosts were feared and were a very serious threat. So families were often able to do whatever it took to provide their deceased loved one whatever the morticians were advertising at that time. Shabti dolls. When a person was alive, they were expected to donate a certain amount of time to community service, for instance, building the pyramids. So if somebody was sick or they just didn't have the time or didn't want to, they could send a player in their spot. Well, the Egyptians believed that this tradition carried on even in afterlife. So what they had done was they had these little bitty Shapti dolls placed into the tomb or the coffin of the deceased. And depending on how many Shapti dolls were in this tomb or burial place determined how wealthy they were. So the more dolls, the more wealth. They said that these Shapti dolls would be able to be the replacement worker for the dead in the afterlife. They were coveted by everybody. King Tut. One of the most famous mummies or tombs ever found was that of King Tut. He became pharaoh when he was 8 or 9, and he ruled until his death at 19. Due to inbreeding, Tut had many health issues. For instance, he had a cleft palate, he had scoliosis, and he had severe bouts of malaria. He also had some kind of deformity on his left foot. It caused him to walk with a cane. He died from an actual gangrene infection, which they believe was from a broken leg. King Tut's tomb. He was actually buried in the Valley of the Kings in a small tomb, and they said it was unusually small